Sequoia, thank you so much for making the time to speak to us today.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
We're going to talk about the Mass propers. We'll probably talk about the Latin Mass as well, but I always like to ask just at the beginning, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, how you're employed, etc.?
Sure. I'm an entrepreneur and I do great many things, but for the most part, I am a wardrobe and fashion stylist. So I'm actually the stylist for the LA Business Today show, and I styled for a short film, and I kind of do just a lot of things in that industry. But I also can do styling for like personal clientele, and it just basically involves dressing people either to fit, a script as far as the character, or to make sure that they look good on camera. And then again, just if somebody needs styling for an event or
Nice.
daily life to look good according to their body type and color palette, that's basically what I do.
Let me ask you this. I hope I don't
Yeah.
get in trouble. How old are you?
I'm 24.
Okay, so 24. So super young, and also, obviously with a lot of responsibility. If you're in charge of people, going before live cameras on TV, that's amazing. And it's great to speak to you. As you probably know, in this series, we've talked to all kinds of people. We've talked to priests, we've talked to college professors, just a wide variety of people trying to raise awareness of the Mass propers. And so thank you for telling us a little bit about background. And I think what I'd like to ask first, especially bearing in mind what you just said, in terms of your preparing people to go on camera and, makeup, I presume, and that type of thing. You were mentioning, before the interview started, you were mentioning that you attend the Latin Mass, or sometimes you attend the Latin Mass, and you had mentioned the part of the reason you were attracted to it was because it was beautiful. And I was wondering if you could just kind
Right.
of elaborate a little bit about that.
Yes, no, definitely. Well, I think aesthetics is very important in general. Even like say for my business, for example, people they do judge you on the way you look, but also there's an attractiveness when you're drawn to a person. And even, the beauty can make you trust or mistrust someone, or, want to do business with that person. But I think the same goes kind of with the Mass, in that the beauty draws you in. And if something on the outside, isn't beautiful and drawing you in, then, it's going to be harder. And sometimes people, will focus, oh, well, it's about the message, or it's about the scripture, or, whatever it might be, which, yes, that is the essential. Just like with a person, it's essentially who they are as a person that should matter, but that's not the way we're wired. And so it needs to be beautiful, in order to draw a person in. And not only that, but even with the Mass, again, it's just like a very, not at all an equal comparison between people dressing and the Mass. But on the Mass side, you have an even more of a reason as to why it should be beautiful, because it's all for the honor and glory of God.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think it's vital.
I have to say, it's refreshing to speak to you, because if you've been around colleges or universities recently, it's all about, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. There's no such thing as beauty. How dare you say that something is beautiful because someone else might not think it is. There's no absolute truth. I mean, you've probably heard all those things, tossed around.
Yes, a lot.
So it's nice to talk to someone who is not afraid to say there is such a thing as beauty in this world. And I'm presuming, in terms of, for example, like the traditional Latin Mass, I'm presuming you're thinking of things, maybe even just like the vestments, for example, or,
Oh,
the,
yeah, no,
the
definitely.
thurible and that type of thing. Because, like I say, it's like, I don't know, like, people argue about this and that, and they argue about the history of things and so forth, because, the vestments, as you probably know, are more or less the way that the ancient Romans dressed, and there's that, because it reminds us of the antiquity of the church, and that's beautiful. But there's also the whole notion of it is just simply a beautiful garment. And sometimes I wonder
Right.
if people in today's day and age can even sit back and even admit that. I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
No, I mean, I definitely agree, but to kind of go back to what you were saying that kind of led into this about people saying beauty's in the eye of the beholder and all of that. I mean, yes, but again, I think when they say that, they're talking about the integrity of a person or whatever it might be. But there is objective beauty. And while I think that there are a lot of tenants out there that say, are saying, no, it's whatever you want it to be, I think most people deep down agree that, no, there's a certain standard of beauty, even, again, like with film, because it's just, I'm using that often because it's the industry that I work in and that I know with fashion. There are certain standards. And I mean, even people in a secular industry like Hollywood will dress up, to the nines for the Academy Awards or the Oscars or whatever it might be. So I think it's only fitting for such an occasion as the Mass that, you'd want to do the same and have those beautiful vestments, and to have that objective beauty. So, no, I completely agree that that's very important to the Mass and to, again, recalling our traditions and our heritage coming from Rome and, again, the antiquity of the Mass,
sure,
being handed down to us over all this time.
Well, and of course, in a short interview like this, we can't go into everything, but I would mention that maybe at a future interview, I think before the interview, you and I were talking about the fact that a lot of times when it comes to the ordinary form, there is more that could be done in terms of presenting beauty in the context of the Mass. And kind of along that line, I don't want to derail anything that you were saying or any of your points, but I also wanted to make sure that we could also touch on the Mass propers, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Because you're a person, my understanding is that you attend the ordinary form and also the extraordinary form. Is that correct?
Yes, I do attend both.
So, for example, when you go to the extraordinary form, I'm just assuming you're familiar with the introit and the gradual and the offertory and the communion antiphon.
Right.
I mean, those things are things that I'm assuming you know how to follow all that, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And now we get into the other thing, though, and this is what we talked, again, just briefly before the interview. So many people don't realize that in the ordinary form, the Mass propers are also still there, and we are supposed to pray them, we are supposed to sing them. So the introit, the gradual, the offertory, the communion, those are all still there. They weren't done away with. Most of them are identical, actually, at least for the Sundays, to the what was in the extraordinary form. And I was just, one of the reasons why we're doing these interviews is because, people like you who are obviously very intelligent and up on everything, you had said you weren't really familiar with that fact that they're still around in the ordinary form. Is that correct?
Yes, until recently I wasn't. I mean, really, it was from the work that you've done, but also when I do attend the ordinary form, it's usually at St. Michael's Abbey with the Norberton Fathers in Silverado Canyon area, and they do use the propers. Okay. So, you can see, which they do the Novus Ordo the way it was intended to be rather than what's in your average parish. But yes, in your average parish, that's completely lacking. Mm-hmm. So until I, learned about that and saw them doing it regularly, when I started regularly attending also at the Abbey, it was before an idea that, I didn't know, the Novus Ordo was supposed to have the propers too, just like the extraordinary form.
Yeah. If you're like me, you probably suspected that they might be doing something wrong or weird or odd.
Well, I just was kind of like, oh, wow, that's really beautiful, but I didn't, make the connection right away when I realized, oh, wait, this is the way it's supposed to be, and no one else has that happening anywhere else. I mean, and not only that, but if they're singing a hymn or, whatever it might be, it's not even necessarily scriptural, or it's not, and I mean, I'm talking about your average parish, but it's not necessarily scriptural, or, the hymns are just so out there, or they're written by a non-Catholic, so it's just, there's no relevance to the Mass of the day, to the readings and the propers, which they're supposed to be, to my understanding, to where if they're not singing the actual proper or introit, it has to be something that incorporates still that same message.
Right. Well, and that's what's so difficult. It's very difficult to speak to people about this because a lot of people will instantly say, but it's allowed to replace them. It's allowed to replace the propers. And technically, in the new Mass, the ordinary form, it is allowed, but then the question becomes, why are 99.9% of Catholics replacing all of the propers 99.9% of the time. That's a question that
Right.
is a different question than whether or not something's allowed or permitted or tolerated.
But I mean, just because something is allowed doesn't mean it's supposed to be the ordinary circumstance that should always occur 100% of the time, which I think is why, even within the, ordinary form, Latin is supposed to have pride of place in the Roman Rite. I'm not talking about Eastern rites or anything like that, but in the Latin Roman Rite, Latin is supposed to still have pride of place. There's even a minimum, that Pope Paul VI has put out about, I believe it was Pope Paul VI at least, about which parts of the Mass should be in Latin, of course the Kyrie in Greek. But, that's not followed. I mean, hardly in your average ordinary form parish do you hear, the Sanctus in Latin. It's always, just sung in the vernacular. So, a lot of times I think that they take that little, loophole, or they take the exception and they make it the norm. So we're missing a lot of that.
But at the same time, I think young Catholics like you that are becoming informed and learning about these things, that's going to change, and I see it changing, and it already is changing. So let me just say thank you for your beautiful example, and thank you for
thank you.
Speaking today. I always find it inspiring to speak to people like you, and as I mentioned, I hope you'll consider coming on again.
Oh, definitely. Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Well, God bless.